respond in an hour. I have 5 minutes to explain to you the Bank of Canada lawsuit. If you don't know about it, you're not going to get an explanation from me, okay? Essentially, in very broad strokes, the lawsuit, which was filed in December of 2011, it's a constitutional challenge to the Bank of Canada and the Minister of Finance in refusing to give interest-free loans to the federal and provincial government, which was the central reason the bank was set up initially in 1937. That was the reason the bank was set up. So these loans could be given to the federal and provincial, and at the time directly to municipal governments, for up to a maximum of 1/3 of their annual budget, so long as that 1/3 was paid back the next year, which, if you look at the numbers, is easier to do. And so this is how historically we paid our World War II debt. We paid for the Trans-Canada Highway, we paid for the St. Lawrence Seaway, and we paid for the explosion of the building of universities in the 60s and 70s across the country. So that is the first, in a broad stroke, challenge to compel the two levels of government to request and to rekindle the primary purpose that the Bank of Canada was set up to do. And it's couched in a lot of different constitutional challenges. Also challenged is the joining of Canada to the Bank of International Settlements, and everything you heard from Ellen Brown there is pleaded in our case, the history of it, in terms of our being linked with the BIS, the IMF, and all the other foreign private bankers who actually give our public bank, the only public bank in the G20, its marching orders. The minutes and the minutes of the meetings that our bank governor has with these other bankers, even though he reports to the Minister of Finance and Parliament, he claims are held secret, and we're not allowed to know the content of those meetings. That's also being constitutionally challenged here. We're challenging the government for relinquishing and advocating its constitutional duty to govern under various provisions of the Constitution Act. The other part of the challenge, which goes hand in hand with this whole banking fraud that's going on, is against the Minister of Finance and the budgetary process. What happens in the budgetary process every year, which is a constitutionally required process where, they all dress up in medieval clothing and they knock on the House of Commons for the speech from the throne. That's actually a constitutional requirement. Since 1215 in the Magna Carta, because only Parliament can impose taxes, Parliament will not impose taxes, cannot impose taxes before the government tells the House of Commons how it plans to spend that money in the next session. And so it's a requirement. The speech from the throne is a constitutional requirement before the budget is actually passed. The problem with the budget in our country is there's a sleight of hand that goes on, and that is, just to give you an example, they'll say, that our expenditure needs are $280 billion. We're going to have revenue of $240 billion. Therefore, we need to borrow $40 billion, and that's our deficit for the year. Well, that's not true. They collect or could collect a lot more than that, but then they transfer back to taxpayers, running from everyone from the single mother or single parent to mega corporations. They transfer back money in tax credits, and then they say, we have $240 billion, we need to spend $280. And why is that significant? That's significant because if they're collecting $400 billion, the MP should know that, because then they can have an intelligent, if they're capable, I don't know, maybe half of them couldn't do it, but if they could have an intelligent debate on whether or not they want to run a $40 billion deficit or shave the tax credits and run a balanced budget. And so that's a very nasty sleight of hand that's going on with our budgetary process, which we say is unconstitutional. Now, you know, it's coincidence, I don't know if it's coincidence, you know, that since 1974, when the last interest-free loans were made to the governments to meet their budgetary needs, every time we've run a deficit, it's been very close, been very close to the interest payments on our debt. So usually, if you look at a budget, usually the deficit that's run in deficit years is to finance the interest on the accumulated debt from deficit to deficit. It's like the old opium wars in China. We've been forced on an interest addiction from the banks. Now, the reason they say that they don't want to make interest-free loans from the Bank of Canada is they claim, Minister of Finance perpetually claims that there'll be an inflationary pressure, which is you know, metric ton of horseshit, because the Bank of Canada, and especially the Federal Reserve in the last few years, the Federal Reserve has been given interest-free loans to the private banks. Our primary lending rate is 0.75% this week. So the private banks get their money from the Bank of Canada at less than 1%, and they lend it back to our government at 3.5%, and we pay the bill. So if the Bank of Canada giving money to the private banks at nearly 0% isn't inflationary, why would it be inflationary if they give it to the government? Because it's going to be paid off in the next fiscal year anyway. And so basically those are the two broad stroke challenges. The statement of claim runs about 25, 26 pages. I mean, it's more involved than that. You have to set out what's going on. At the first level, the government brought a motion to strike the whole claim, saying it was not justiciable, that the courts didn't have the rights or the expertise or the wherewithal to hear the case. It was struck. I appealed that on behalf of the plaintiffs. I was successful at the second level, where the court said, well, we had nominally sued for $1 for every Canadian on a class action. The court said, forget about the tort and the damages, but you can pursue the constitutional declaratory relief with respect to how they're managing the bank and with respect to the budgetary process. The government has appealed that. I've partially appealed part of the order. What the judge says, I'm going to strike these portions, but not these portions, but redraft the whole statement of claim. I don't want to redraft the whole statement of claim because I don't want to go for another round of a motion to strike. I'd rather proceed on the constitutional relief. So on Monday, we're before 3 judges of Federal Court of Appeal to determine how much of this, if any, of the case is to go forward, because the government has appealed the order that the constitutional relief can go forward. And so we'll see what happens on Monday. I'm not a pessimist, but I am an optimist with too much experience, so I'm not going to predict. And from there, it's likely to go. If we lose, we'll go to the Supreme Court of Canada. You need permission. If the government loses, I know very well that they're going to seek permission from the Supreme Court. So it'll have to go to the Supreme Court of Canada to decide whether the case actually proceeds, and if so, to what extent. So this is why cases don't get litigated in Canada. We're going to the Supreme Court in order to determine whether or not my clients can proceed in court. And this is very typical of all government cases that I do. We go through this round of motion to strike. All right, so that's in a nutshell the case, and I always make my presentations brief because I find it more beneficial. If people have questions on it, I'm happy to answer.
Two days ago, I read the decision, and so my understanding isn't as clear as yours. Okay? But in that decision, there was an element of accuracy, I thought, in that in your submission on claim, you had not verified that these elderly people and this unknown organization represented all of Canada, and that even these people had not been wounded in a serious way. Well, I want to identify that I was wounded today. If there's $60 billion of unnecessary interest paid, this is 1.1 trillion, as Ann mentioned earlier,
Right.
then today, every Canadian, not just me and people here, paid
Right.
$5 of unnecessary interest. Now, if that doesn't destroy our country, then you add up the $1.1 trillion and say, well, how many hospitals could we build with that we didn't build, that we farmed off? And how many transportation things and how much energy facilities and so on. That's where all of us have been wounded over all those years, and we're still being wounded. So that damage is explicit, and it certainly should be revealed to the judge on the.
I don't disagree with you. I think there, if you want me to guess and read behind the lines, is that the court is concerned that when you pursue a tort claim for damages, it will involve witnesses and witnesses and witnesses. And what the court is really saying is, in this decision, is your real beef is with the constitutional issues, which is true. We're not really after damages per se. It's with how the bank has been turned into a useless appendix. And so what the court is really saying is we can determine that in hundredths of the time in terms of judicial resources that we can a lawsuit that will require all these witnesses. So let's get to the nub of it. And I don't, although I'm representing my clients, I don't necessarily disagree with that point of view. Okay.
You have access to the hard data, is the point.
Sorry?
You have access to the hard data that is required to back up that claim.
Yeah, we do, and it's pleaded, yeah.
Yeah, we have another question up here. Hi. My name is Stan Tucker. I'm from St. Mary's. First off, I'd like to thank you, Rocco, and Ann, and the COMER committee for this gigantic task you're taking on here. I'm here today I wrote in the local St. Mary's paper. I managed to put an article in there on 2012, January 20th, about the COMER case and the lawsuit. I recently approached the town editor to write again, and his question came up. He's bewildered as to why mainstream media hasn't talked about this. And I originally sent him your comment from a press release. I know you've addressed this question before.
I'll quickly address it if you want me to address it again. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sure, go ahead. And I just wanted to follow that up because I'm also here to kind of, with like-minded people, to see if we could help you out and resolve this and work together on this. I want to hear how other people have, or who has been notified and the difficulties.
All right. Don't tell me what to do when I'm up here. If you want me off, take me off. Do not come up here and whisper instructions in my ear. You got that? Okay, have a seat, please. The answer to that is that the controlled media basically has been given marching orders not to cover the story. And when people say that I'm being a conspiracy theorist on that, well, my answer always is the allegation that I'm engaging in conspiracy theories is that if I'm a conspiracy theorist, then you must be a coincidence theorist. And coincidences are not against the Criminal Code of Canada. Conspiracies are. They're indictable offenses because they happen every day. So the media's been told not to cover this story. This is a bigger story than a lot of cases I've done, and a lot of my cases are front and center, CBC, national news. This is a much bigger story than a Supreme Court judge getting barred from taking a seat, or a terrorism case. That a lot of my stories get covered wall to wall nationally. This story is much bigger than any of them, and it has not been covered by one single mainstream media. I'm sorry, here's that.
There we go. If you get Supreme Court permission to proceed, where do you start again? Do you have to go back down to the provincial level, or
No, it's in the federal court, trial division. We go back to the federal court.
It goes back to the federal.
And then we start the procedure of filing our documents, discoveries, and trial. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Rocco, you go back to court on Monday. how long do you expect this current round to last for? And do you have any estimate or guess on when you'll get a decision from Monday's hearing coming back and when the next step will be?
Well, if they kick my ass out the door with a steel toe boot, it'll be the same day. If not, they'll reserve and we'll get the decision in the mail in a month or two, 4 or 6 weeks. It could be anything from the same day from the bench saying, thank you for your arguments, but this thing is going away, in which case we'll go to the Supreme Court, to we'll reserve and we'll get back to you in writing.
And are we looking at like a one-day hearing here, or is this gonna go
It's a
on for
half-a-day
a week, or?
Oh, it's a half a day hearing, just a morning.
Oh, good, I got an appointment in it too, glad to hear that.
Yeah, we have another question over here from the people that don't have mics. But before we go there, just wanted to make sure that we're in common with the 2-minute rule on asking questions, like just take 2 minutes to ask a question. And also, we're looking to go toward more of a panel to have the other panelists involved too. So if we can just respect the 2 minutes per question or statement that you want to make, thanks very much. Go ahead.
Sure, so my question's a little morbid, so you'll have to forgive me. What happens when the plaintiffs go to heaven?
I'm sorry?
What happens when the plaintiffs die? If. I'll say if.
Well, Anne can answer that. COMER's not dying, but, you know.
But I mean, does the case continue
No.
even without?
The case can continue. The COMER is a plaintiff, and the court's decided that the committee has standing.
Okay, great. Long live Ann Emmett. Thank you.
If I go to heaven before this thing gets settled, I'll come back and haunt them all.
Hear, hear.
We have one question over here, but, is there someone on the floor? Go ahead if you're on the floor.
No, it's okay.
Just press the yellow button.
Yeah, Rocco, I was wondering, I don't know if you've been up with what's going on in Spain, but I think they'd be very interested in what you're doing here in Canada.
I don't know what's happening in Spain, educate me.
Podemos is, this is a political party that started, they won 5 seats, they want to change their constitution, deprivatize everything, all the services within Spain, and they kind of sound like us, so I think we should get you connected.
Yeah. I'm fluent in Spanish.
Well, I'm not, so it was kind of hard to get in touch with them, but I finally got through in French and English.
Okay.
Thanks.
For English. Go ahead, sir.
Money's always important. Is there any fundraising for this, or any way people can support? I mean, I think that's a big issue.
I can speak to that. I can't because it's against the law for me to speak to fundraising. It's called chapter.
We have been fortunate in not having to do that very seriously to this point, but we're certainly going to have to get serious about it now. Up to this point, Bill Clem has been able to charge along primarily, but we do receive donations at the moment, and they come to COMER, made up to COMER and addressed to me, and if you would like to know where to send them, please speak to me at the end of the meeting.
Just a quick follow-up, would COMER qualify as a tax-free, apolitical organization?
But the advice I give to clients who want to donate to organizations who don't have a tax number is I say to them, calculate what you would have donated with your tax deduction and how much you would have been out of your pocket after the tax deduction, and just donate that. And you're no worse off.
Another question over here.
Actually, it's a comment. I want everybody to remember that we own all the 12,000 shares of the Bank of Canada. We have been ripped off from our bank. They had no right to do it, and they have to be brought to account. Secondly, please remember that the same people who print our money print the news.
Yeah. That's true.
Hi. Just for a quick backup, I had been told, or I was under the impression that the government had ordered a media blackout on this issue. So correct me if I'm wrong. And the second thing is, has there been any consideration or talk, maybe not with you, Rocco, but and with COMER, about the repercussions for Canada and our credit rating and our, the exchange rate on our money, if we did reinstitute the Bank of Canada?
First of all, about a government-ordered blackout, I don't have any evidence of that, but my suspicions are that. I don't doubt that there's been a government-ordered blackout. With respect to your other question, it's a very hard question to answer in the abstract. I don't think that it would do anything if the Bank of Canada reinstituted interest-free loans, except to solidify our standing. It would make us more viable. All this fear-mongering about inflationary impact and all is just garbage. Just garbage.
I believe there's a gentleman up here, Jim Karagianis, go ahead. That's you. Yeah.
Will you be giving a press release after trial on Monday?
Sorry?
Will you be giving a press conference after the trial on Monday?
Usually not. I usually wait for the decision. If some people have questions, I answer them, but, there hasn't been any scrums on this case. Right. Yeah. Okay.
Are you familiar with what Iceland did as far as once they realized that the central banking Ponzi scheme was a fraud and their government was actually shadow government, not really representative, that they basically just kicked the central banking out of the country? So why are we not doing that as opposed to asking for permission through a legal forum, which seems, in my opinion, legality is not reality, and I'm not too sure why we're doing it this way, asking permission from the lawyers that are the actual ones that are creating this problem subversively underneath. So why are we not doing a similar format of what Iceland is doing?
Well, the difference in Iceland is the government did it.
Sorry?
The difference in Iceland is the government did it. We're not the government. We don't have that power.
Well, we've just had proven election fraud that this government sitting doesn't have any validity either, though. So.
Yeah, but you got to get somebody to declare that. As far as the system works, they're sitting there as the government. Nobody else.
You take it upon yourself to extrapolate that way. It's got to be somebody that brings that.
I don't understand your question. We can't do what Iceland did because our government's unwilling to do what Iceland did. It's their government who did what they did.
Okay.
The citizens here can't just take, or a portion of the citizens just can't take it into their own hands and affect what the Icelandic government affected in Iceland. That's what, yeah.
Okay. And isn't the Bank of Canada the one that authorizes the Canada banknote to print the birth certificate bond?
I'm not familiar with the birth certificate bond.
Okay. And are you, it's my understanding that currency banknotes are checks. Is that your understanding?
A currency?
Banknotes are considered checks.
They're negotiable instruments under the Negotiable Instruments Act, but they're not the same as checks. Checks are basically what we refer to as credits. They're different from currency. Okay, checks go from point A to point B. They're credits. Currency floats freely, is not attached to anything or anybody. Well, on a very theoretical scale, yes, but they're different from checks. I can give my banknote to anybody in the room. If I want to give a check to everybody in the room, I got to make a check to everybody in the room. They're credits. They're different instruments. There's different negotiable instruments.
You're familiar with the Bill of Exchange Act for human purposes, as far as our signature being able to discharge?
Well, I'm not going to get into that. I'm familiar with the Negotiable Instruments Act because I did a lot of work under it when I was a Department of Justice lawyer, but there are a lot of misunderstandings on the internet, and that's one of them.
Thanks very much. We have another question up here and one on the floor, so let's go down there first, get a little bit variety. Press your button and talk.
Hi, I don't really understand much at all what you're talking about.
Neither do I, so.
So I'm basically an activist. Is it possible that on Monday this whole thing could be squashed? Yes. So that, in other words, the very few people, the very few, I've now and then gone to COMER, but the whole, all of Canada, all of the activists of the city will know nothing, heard nothing of this, and it'll all be gone. Without, you know, how come we haven't got the activists of the city that Sid Ryans of the city, the politicians, that we're not pissed off with this whole thing.
Well, it's subject to going to the Supreme Court. It could be quashed. It's a very complicated question you answer, and to be honest with you, I don't attribute any, manure on any flies or vice versa. The problem is that these issues are very complex. They require some thinking through, a lot of thinking through, and quite frankly, 98% of the MPs sitting in the House of Commons are too afraid to touch it for looking stupid. They just don't understand it. It's not their fault. And they don't want to understand it, and so they just simply ignore it. They put their head in the sand. And a lot of the major parties don't want to understand it because they agree with the system at large, including the NDP.
That's what happened in the province of Quebec, when the government wouldn't understand what the students, why the students were complaining about their debts, the amount of money they had to pay. But they took to the streets and they defeated the government.
I don't disagree with you, but that takes a certain amount of elevation of consciousness to the issue, focusing on the issue and how it affects them. We don't teach our children very well about finances and the economic system. A lot of the kids going through the school system simply don't understand the economic system. A lot of professionals, a lot of elected officials don't understand. They just don't understand. If you ask anybody for a definition of money, they think they know what it means, but they don't.
Thanks, Dick.
Good afternoon, everyone. My question is, for freedom of speech, you mentioned that the media is not allowed to document any of this process. My question is, what about CNN, other international media, is able to...
What? I'm sorry, which CNN, sorry?
I say, if CNN cover this proceedings, are you allowed to speak to international media?
I don't understand what international media means.
Well, you mentioned that the media do not have been reported in the main media in Canada at all. And like the gentleman that said, even the politicians, this can go, and no many people will know about it.
No, I know, but when you say international media, I don't understand. The major media is all connected.
Under the spirit of freedom of speech, right?
Right.
And this is the situation going in here with people of Canada. If the local media doesn't cover, and the cross Canada is not covered, my question is, can the international media be covered? Would you have a freedom to speak to them?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I don't know. Give me an example of who you have in mind when you say the international media.
Media in general, but also probably independent media.
Well, the independent media has been covering. If you go on the internet, you'll see independent media covering it. But in terms of large-scale media, or mainstream, for lack of a better word, they don't tend to cover these things. For the same reason, they have the same vested interest in Europe as they do in America and here. Yeah.
Hi, Stan again. I have a question for Mike, actually, the Postal Union guy. I'm out of curiosity as to how aware the postal members are of this class action lawsuit in the Bank of Canada. And does the union, when you've got a lot of people, does the union talk about this at their meetings and stuff like that to your members?
As far as I'm aware, we haven't taken any kind of position on a class action lawsuit or really even discussed it throughout the organization, but our members are mobilizing around the demands on postal banking and setting up financial operations at Canada Post. And so there have been a whole lot of discussions at every level of our organization about that, as well as educational pieces, developing of talking points for people to get this out. For us, it's an important issue because it's an alternative vision for the post office, where the government thinks they can, or they're at least trying to sell us this idea that we can cut our way to growth. Instead, we think we need to develop new services in order to bring in revenue to make sure the post office is sustainable in the long run.
You need the camera stand.
Okay, I think he has a follow-up question. One moment, please.
Well, then, you know, then this case backs up what you guys want to do there. So, I'm curious how much you knew of the case before you came here today. And don't you think it's a good idea to tell your members about what you've learned here today on this case of the Bank of Canada and what's being done here?
Absolutely. I wasn't actually aware of this case before coming here today, so this has been very informative, this whole event, and there's absolutely a lot for us to take back to our members.
Hey, Rocco, I just want to clarify something. You said that you worked you had worked on a federal negotiable instrument act? I'm not aware of any federal negotiable instrument act.
The Negotiable Instruments Act is a federal act.
I was just wondering,
Banking Act by the federal parliament.
did you mean the Bills of Exchange Act?
Sorry, yeah, the Bills of Exchange.
So you know, okay, so you know then,
There's also a Negotiable Instruments Act.
okay, so the Bills of Exchange Act, you know then that the birth certificate is mentioned, I think it's in section 7 as a warrant in the Bills of Exchange Act?
I'm not gonna pretend I don't remember every section of the act.
But is the birth certificate mentioned as the warrant? It's a warrant mentioned in the Bills of Exchange Act? Don't recall, okay, thank you.
Can I just speak to that? The warrant in 1694 was the document that would allow the Bank of England to receive its dividend. And the dictionary that I introduced here today includes the table of contents for the Bills of Exchange Act of 1882. And the dictionary also includes the definitions of negotiable instruments from the Slater Bills, Checks and Notes document that I refer to as the prayer book of Lamont. Because you've chosen the word prayer book because when these bills are made into law, and when these bills are made into money, and when these bills go into default as a negotiable instrument, they go to the courts, and the holder of the negotiable instrument charges or claims for a complete refund from whoever made it. And that was the essence of my presentation today, that the taxpayer, as you, as part of the corporation soul, have made your own government responsible to pay for these instruments. And therefore the government can never refuse this, and this is why John Trichet said signature will be honored. If you put your signature to the negotiable instrument and it goes into a dishonorable state, you are part of the government will pay, that will go into your government deficit. That is the tax arbitrage component of my presentation today.
It wasn't so much a question as answering other people's concerns. Like for instance, Iceland and stuff like that. I think it's there's too much blame and pointing at politicians and bankers in general when it comes to issues of our national security and things of that nature. Whereas like we have to understand that we have to create the political will or the public will to get a lot of these issues that we want heard to be heard. Because politicians are people like any one of us, and so are bankers. And unless you're educating yourself on the issues, like, they're not going to know. So it's up to us, as the political will, as the public, to create that education system. And for instance, I know there's a lot of things that COMER does that doesn't necessarily get read. And I think as people who are interested in this topic, we should be asking COMER, and maybe that's the question I have at the end of the day, what does COMER need from us to help create the political and public will for these things to actually be heard, you know, in the House of Commons? For instance, like, the English House of Commons talked about how money was created just recently, in the last year. I think Ukraine is doing that same thing. And a few other countries have just announced that same thing as well. So what can we do as supporters to try and get this to be heard and to be a public issue, to try and get this national coverage?
Well, I know that you and your group certainly are spreading word. COMER is, for one thing, we have to grow. Numbers were not our game. We were a think tank, but now there are so many tasks to be done. COMER is planning to work at two levels: the level of coalition and the level of community. I think the biggest job has to be done at the level of community, with things like public forums and follow-up. And so you can simply, I mean, read what we print. A copy of the COMER Journal goes to every member of Parliament every 2 months. If you have a website, put the information out on it. Wherever you can tell people, do it. Support meetings like this one. Be in touch. For example, there's a lot of information on the COMER.org site, and our COMER Journal is printed there, along with all kinds of reports on the court cases, for example. We're looking to set up another website of a different kind in the near future. It's a matter of getting the word out. And of course, we're also going to have to raise funds. We've never had to do that either. But it's going to cost money to do these things, and that will be helpful.
Okay, a question for Al Rosen to get involved. In your presentation, you were alluding to Nortel. So the question would be, how would we let people know about this accounting fraud and the auditors that are involved, as well as, I guess, the Ontario Securities Commission, given that a lot of pension plans like OMERS, teachers, and so forth were into Nortel?
Well, it's part of the same point about what the media chooses to cover. So I think that you start with just talking to your neighbors and explaining to them that it's not what is said. Like, it's just, to me, it's outrageous that comments can be made about the principles involved in this new accounting, that it's better than the old, and on and on and on, and it goes. And I try to do presentations to the big law firms and so on, and it's still a matter of they have heard all the cliches before you even get there. And the public believes these outrageous statements. So I've been trying to get around, and other of our people have been trying to get around to seniors, for example, just to explain to them that it's not what they read in the publications, it's not what they hear on TV. Don't forget, a lot of TV, the ads, who's putting the ads on? So if you go back 5 or 6 years, I didn't have trouble getting on some of these business publications. They asked me, and you could end in and you tell the story. But then once the advertiser said, get rid of that bleep, that was the end of it. So you have to overcome that built-in high advertising content, and you do it by speaking really to your friends and explaining to them what's happening. You have to get a build-up of the population to harass the lawmakers.
I don't know what else to do.
All right, well, harass the lawmakers. We have 15 minutes left and 5 or 6 questioners, so Judy, you're next.
Well, I would just like to ask, we've noticed that a lot of this is being recorded. A lot is being recorded. What's the plan to disseminate the recording of this seminar?
I think I can speak to that. I've arranged for a number of audio and video recordings. I was going to put this in my closing remarks, that we will be compiling this. And when I say we, the COMER members, will be able to publish the material as a presentation for the entire seminar. And where things didn't quite work out, technically speaking, and we had to cut short or didn't see videos, we can put those in. It's the same as you can make something look better. And so those will be done, and they will be put onto the internet. I can tell you now the dictionary that I prepared will be on the website in England, so it's free, you can look at it. I hope that COMER will put the same dictionary on their website so people can look at that. And all the material will be put out on live web, probably in a week from a single camera source.
Okay, next question.
Mike? Okay.
Yellow.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that we can do here in Canada. Trudeau did say in 1982 that Canadians can now amend their constitution, and I think it's high time that we did. In Canada, over 14 million young adults have never participated in the constitutional question, and it's up to us to push that. What we've done is, and I've asked Rocco to look at this, it's the IQ's Indigenous and Civil Unified Sovereign Enactment for self-governance and self-determination for Canadians to go to a direct democracy system instead of the present false democratic system we have now. So hopefully, with what's going to happen on Monday, if all falls short and we have to go, Rocco has to bring that to the federal court, I think we need to take a step further and start changing our constitution and include the Bank of Canada within that. So that's just something that we want to add. Thank you.
Okay, just a very quick question with regard to ownership of the Bank of Canada. I've heard several comments about the Canadian population owns the Bank of Canada. I was under the impression that the Crown is the ultimate shareholder of the Bank of Canada. If that could be clarified. And secondly, is there only one corporate entity called the Crown, or there seems to be numerous Crowns? Thank you.
Well, under the Bank of Canada Act, the Minister of Finance holds the shares in trust for Her Majesty. Her Majesty Her Majesty since the patriation of the Constitution has become a sort of theoretical enigma. In essence, the Minister of Finance holds the shares in trust for Canadians. Whether or not there's various crowns depends on what you're dealing with, what legal issue. There's a doctrine that says that for certain purposes the Crown is one and indivisible. Clearly, the Crown is divisible when we're dealing with division of powers under the Constitution. There's a provincial Crown and a federal Crown. So depending on what you're dealing with a different Crown, but it's one and indivisible for certain other things, for instance, charter infringements on individuals.
So who owns the Bank of Canada is a bit of a shell game. Is it safe to say that, or is that a strategy?
No, we own it, but the Minister of Finance holds the shares in trust. The Minister of Finance, under the Bank of Canada Act, contrary to popular misinformation, is the boss, and he's politically accountable to Parliament. You'll hear crap out there that the bank governor is independent of the government. No. If there's a dispute between the government and the Bank of Canada governor, the Minister of Finance, with the approval of Cabinet, can give the Bank of Governor marching orders. It's right there in the statute, and the Bank of Canada governor has to follow them.
Next question.